Right, so today we are going to be talking, as Mary said, about model-based testing. And specifically, we're going to be thinking and looking at how we can apply model-based testing into Cypress. Okay. Now, I guess just a bit of background before we get into it. So I'm from a company called Curiosity Software. We're kind of split into two main areas. The first area we're in is test data management. Which is obviously a big area, but with testing and automation, test data is obviously massive. It's probably one of the hardest problems. So we have some solutions in that space, but of relevance, we've probably been doing model-based testing collectively for kind of the past decade. We've worked on many tools, we've worked on many implementations and many projects where we've kind of transformed companies from more traditional software development into actually a model-based, model-driven approach to their software delivery and their software development. So, even though today we're going to be showing, a lot of kind of demos and showing a lot of stuff of our products, what I'm hoping is that this session is going to be more geared around kind of education, kind of providing you some context as to why modeling is important, why would we model in the first place, but then also, showing you some solutions in terms of what modeling actually is, how some organizations are implementing modeling, and really just kind of going through and explaining what it is and how you would do it. Okay, so this is kind of the rough agenda for today. So what I thought we would do firstly is talk about some of the challenges that, sorry, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, sorry.
I can hear you perfectly well, but someone else had some background noise, I think.
Oh, right, okay, sorry. All right, good. So this is kind of the rough agenda for today. So what I thought we would firstly do is spend a bit of time looking at, some of the challenges we're seeing in organizations that we work with in terms of automation and just software delivery in general. I guess we've got quite a range of different people on the call today. Some of you may be working for startups, some of you may be working for kind of medium-sized companies, and some of you may be working for large enterprises. Now, hopefully, these kind of challenges will resonate across the companies, no matter what size you're working in. But certainly, if you have any thoughts or any questions throughout or any additional comments, just post them in the Slido chat and we'll be happy to discuss them at the end. Okay. We're then going to move on to thinking about model-based testing. What is it? How can it help with these problems? I'm really talking from our experience about where we've seen benefits in moving teams towards more successful automation. We're then going to look at an example of model-based testing and how we have applied that to the Cypress framework. So we have a pretty extensive integration that sits on top of Cypress, and it basically allows us to create, Cypress resources and also Cypress test scripts that we can push out and execute. And then finally, we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. Okay, so I'm hoping, we'll probably get through this in about 40 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end so that we can pick up any thoughts, comments, and just any general questions you have. Okay. Now, why model-based testing in the first place? Well, in a typical company, that we kind of go into, initially they start talking about all these big words. We're doing agile, we're doing continuous testing, we want to move towards DevOps. The reality is there's so many buzzwords out there in the industry, but I would say by and large, every company we work with, even though they're using all these new fancy terms and all these new fancy, methodologies, still have the same underlying problems. There's still so many silos that are happening in the way people are developing software. The journey often starts with business analysts or product owners who start defining requirements or user stories of what we're going to build within our sprint or release cycle. And really what you will find is that these user stories are just basically large walls of text. Everything we do in software is very textual based. Which is quite funny because if you sit in one of these sprint planning meetings, often someone will actually stand up and start drawing stuff on a whiteboard or start visually explaining through some wireframes how we want this kind of user story to look and how we want it to operate. But at some point we, transfer these kind of visual representations into textual based user stories in Jira or, Azure DevOps or whatever requirement system we're using. Now, with a lot of the companies we work with, what we actually find is that most bugs actually originate from bad requirements in the first place. There's so many walls of text in there. There's so much ambiguity in what's actually going to be created that, by the time it gets through to actually production or, going out into the wild, that defect has already stemmed from there. Development, pick up these requirements. If the requirements aren't very good, the wrong field will get implemented in the first place. At some point or other, someone has to pick up and own the quality and the testing kind of narrative. Okay. Now, in some of your companies that you guys working, you may not have a dedicated QA team. Okay. It may be that the developers themselves are responsible for QA. It may be that your product owners are doing QA and signing off on user stories. In the larger enterprises, they have dedicated teams, and that's still very much, the way things are moving. Even though we have in some companies seen kind of a devolution of these QA teams into Scrum teams, it's still very much QA oriented. Okay, but at some point, someone has to pick up, these requirements, the system that developers have created, and it's almost a comparison process, right? Does the piece of software the developer has produced meet the initial requirements that were specified? That's basically the job, of quality and making sure something works properly. Okay. Now, most of testing that we see is still actually manual. There's very little automation. I would say the typical company we work with probably has somewhere between 10 to 15% levels of automation. So for you guys out there who are doing Cypress already and have a good knowledge of automation, that's kind of a big, big plus and a big moving point. You guys are probably in quite the rarity, I would say. Now, manual testing, great. A lot of companies are trying to move towards automation. I would say, in most companies we work with, they don't have automation until, 6 to 9 months have passed from a feature going into production. So automation is constantly lagging behind our release cycles, and this is so common. So these are just some of the challenges that we're seeing in the industry. Ambiguous requirements, still an awful lot of manual testing, and when there is automation, it's just far too late in the release cycle. 9 months is just kind of crazy, really. Now, why are people struggling so much with automation? Okay, now, a lot of automation is actually manual in terms of someone still has to sit down and write a script. They have to come up and piece together all of these XPaths, all of these identifiers. You have to come in and you have to actually, create these scripts which are going to go and run and automate the application. Okay. A lot of testing is still manual in terms of you have to still go away and manually design the test that you want to run. So, a lot of people are just oblivious to coverage. They don't know what coverage is. If you're going to test a system and you're going to have confidence in what you're delivering, you need to have quite a good underlying test suite behind that, which is testing all sorts of different user journeys and actually assuring that, the application is working as it should. The third piece here, which is, probably, kind of our bread and butter, but I would say to most automation engineers, this will kind of ring true, test data is just so challenging. If you think about an automation script, it has to be, extremely deterministic. When you run that script, everything has to be in the right place at the right time for it to actually pass and succeed. If I'm relying on virtual services, they need to be spun up. If I'm relying on, API endpoints and different containers, they need to be available. If I'm going to run my script, I need to know what test data and make sure that that test data is in the right places at the right time when I run those scripts as well. Okay. And what we find is that testers actually spend a lot of time hunting for data, trying to find the right data combinations they need. And they also spend a lot of time trying to get it provisioned, especially in the big banks. Getting it made could take, getting one slice of data made, that could touch, 5, 6, 15 different systems. And you may be waiting, months basically for that slice of data to be made available. Okay. So test data is a massive bottleneck, but also for automation, it can destabilize it. you will see scripts fail, not because, you know, there's something wrong with the system, but because the right test data was not there. So just to finish up on some of the other challenges, you know, brittle automation, I'm sure everyone's aware on this call, you know, we're all kind of very familiar with automation. Whenever the application changes, our automation breaks. You know, our identifiers have changed, or, you know, the underlying DOM in a web page has changed. Our identifiers are broken. We have to go back through and, you know, manually maintain these tests. And the reality is you can spend, you know, much more time maintaining your tests, you know, your automation, than it would have taken just to run the test manually in the first place. Okay. The final piece here is, you know, automation code needs to be very reusable. You know, I think some people are often very surprised when you start talking about automation actually being a piece of source code. You know, it should follow the same standards as, you know, a piece of application we're developing. It should have good architecture. It should be reusable. It should be using, you know, objects. It should be well structured, etc., etc. So, you know, so many times we will come into a company, we'll assess their current automation, and the frameworks are just abysmal. They're so poor. There's no good architecture. There's no reusability, and it's just a mess. And then you wonder why the automation has failed when the application has become more complex. And the reality is that it's just because, you know, the automation was not able to scale with the application that we were testing. Okay. So these are just some barriers to test automation that we're seeing in the industry. And I would say almost every company we talk to in some shape or form falls under one of those buckets where they're just struggling with automation in some shape or form. Now, one of the solutions which we've kind of got into, you know, for addressing these problems is model-based testing. Okay. Now, before we kind of show you how this works and what model-based testing is, a good place to start is to think a little bit conceptually and think about some other industries and how they build things. Okay, so one good place to start is to think about architecture. Okay, so let's think about building a house. I want to build a house for my family, which has a bathroom, a kitchen, and some office space for me to work at home. Okay, it's kind of a broad requirement, right? It's a little specification of what I want my house to be. Now, this could raise lots of questions. You know, what dimensions is this house? How many rooms are there going to be? What's the layout? Is there going to be a garden? Where's it located? Etc., etc. You could kind of go on forever with all these questions, right? Now, what you will see in, you know, the building industry, in architecture, is it's very diagram focused. You know, there's a saying where, you know, an image is worth 1,000 words, right? What they will do, what architects will do, is build a model of what needs to be built. And that model has all of the specifications. It has basically everything in it, which dictates how this house is going to be built. And it's very understandable for anyone to come in and look at this model and instantly understand, you know, what's happening, what's going on, what's being built. And it's very easy to start probing questions and getting the information you need just from looking at this diagram. So if we think about, you know, building this home a little bit, firstly, I'm the homeowner. I've got a little specification of what I want. I may draw a little diagram very roughly of what I want to be built. We've got quite a big budget, so we've brought in an architect, and what they have done is taken our little, you know, sketch of the house, and they have basically populated it with some technical features and some further technical specification. So here we've got, you know, where the stairs are, we know where some of the windows are, the doorways, etc., etc. So we've got a bit more information on there. Our budget's even bigger. We've got an interior designer. They've come in and they've actually started to specify, you know, some of the functional features of the room. Where's the bathroom going to be? Where's the toilet? You know, where are the outlets? Where's the kitchen, etc., etc. We then have a plumber and some electricians who have come in and started overlaying their pieces as well. But you kind of get the idea, right? We're going through here and every persona is going through and overlaying their detail onto this diagram of exactly how our house should be built and how it's going to be constructed and what it's going to look like at the end. Now, as I said at the beginning, in software, we are very textual focused. Modeling is exactly this same process that I've just shown. It's very visual. It's basically just drawing diagrams, okay? And really all we're trying to do here is come in and start to overlay kind of visual representations of requirements, features, user stories that are going to be built in our software development lifecycle. So, model-based testing for Cypress. How does it work? What is it? How do we do it? Now, we're going to be talking about a particular tool called Test Modeler. I'm sure if you do a Google for model-based testing, you will find several other tools out there. There's a very popular open source one called GraphWalker, okay, which is quite big in the industry. We have our own technology, Test Modeler, but basically the underlying, premise of these tools is you are just building diagrams, okay? And those diagrams are no more complex than just flowcharts. So you will find, most people are familiar with flowcharting already. Even primary school kids kind of go away and they create little diagrams in their lessons now. So it's quite a familiar area that people can come in and start creating these diagrams. Now, what you will find in your organization, and what we find in many organizations that we work with, is people have spent a lot of time creating assets for their testing already, okay? Now, that may be that, they've been focusing on BDD. They may have Gherkin feature files. They may be feeding them through some kind of Cucumber or SpecFlow framework, okay? You can actually take those existing Gherkin feature files and you can build a model from them automatically. You can reuse them. Same with manual test cases. We work with an awful lot of companies who have got legacy ALM, or they've got manual tests in some kind of newer system like X-Ray or Zephyr in Jira. You can bring in those existing test cases, you can create a model from them. We actually find quite a few companies are doing modeling already, especially in the ERP and CRM space. So what we'll find is that if they have some kind of SAP or ServiceNow or something like that, they will have actually drawn out diagrams already over how the data should flow between different screens, between different processes, and the different business rules that should be in operation, okay? Again, if you've got any existing models, you can actually apply them and reuse them for model-based testing. The other area that we've kind of gone into with Test Modeler is we have scanners and recorders. And we're going to show you one of these pieces of technology today, the scanner, where we can go in, we can scan a web application, and we will automatically assemble the Cypress code for you with all the X parts in and all of that good stuff, okay? But the premise here is you're taking something that exists on the left-hand side, and you can use that to accelerate transitioning to model-based testing. Now, once you have a model, what you will find is that these tools allow you to auto-generate test cases, okay? Now, the way we generate test cases is we generate the minimum number of tests which maximize a certain coverage level you selected. So it may be you select every node, so we will generate the minimum number of tests to cover every node, the minimum number of tests to cover every edge. Some kind of criteria you define, we will generate the minimum number of tests for it. There are other tools out there that will do it based on some other criteria, or they may just go out and say, give me every single possible route through this model, okay? But generally, what you will find with these model-based testing tools is they take a model, they have some kind of transformation function that takes that model and transforms it into a test suite for you. Now, this test suite can be pushed out into your test case management tools. So, a lot of you will be using Jira. I would probably say 80% of people on the call are using Jira with some kind of plugin like X-Ray or Zephyr. There's still an awful lot of Micro Focus, ALM. The new tool Octane is brilliant. The same with Azure DevOps as well. It's a very good tool that we see a lot of success within the industry. But also there's a lot of custom formats out there as well, like your Excels, your PDFs. They're still very much rife, okay? Now, the other piece here is test data. As we said at the beginning, as you go through and you start automating, you find that, test data is a big challenge. You need to have the right data in the right place at the right time to support your automation as it runs, okay? Now, what we allow people to do in Test Modeler, and you could use this as a standalone component, is you can basically put little dynamic data tags in your Cypress script. And what that will do is it will allow you to go off and find data in an SAP environment, in an Oracle environment, SQL Server, Solr, Kafka, mainframe. So you can go and find the data I need, plug it into your Cypress scripts. But you can also say, go and make data I need as well. So as a fallback routine, if you don't find any data, go and make it in all of these wonderful data sources that we have to come up against when we're testing our applications. Now for test automation, we integrate with a lot of frameworks. I think if you look at the standard organization, and probably with a lot of people on this call as well, there's just so many automation frameworks out there. We see a lot of Selenium, we see a lot of Appium, we see a lot of Rest Assured. I think the industry has mostly moved towards open source now, which is fantastic. The problem with a lot of these tools is that you need to build out kind of a fully fledged automation framework, and it becomes very, very difficult to actually assure that you're having good architecture and you're having good test automation coming out the back end, and it's responsive and it's quick to execute, etc., etc. We often recommend Cypress as a great starting point, because actually all you need to do is just install a couple of NPM packages and you're kind of off to go, you're off to the races, so to speak. So we're going to be looking at how we have people using Test Modeler with Cypress today, and we'll show you some of that, how that works. And obviously, all of your standard stuff, you can embed that in source control, you can trigger it via CI/CD, etc., etc. None of that's a problem. Now, the final piece here is run results. Once you execute tests, you can push results back up. You can use your standard reporting, which you've built into your Cypress framework, absolutely fine. Just an API call, you can push the results back up and see them on top of the model. Now, the major benefit here is instead of having to go through and maintain all of these assets individually, your test cases, your test data, your test automation, you just keep the central model up to date. Whenever a requirement changes, your tests will be auto-generated, your test data and your test automation will all be synchronized. Okay, so that is one of the benefits there, is just keeping up with the rate of change that's being faced in the agile environments that we're working in today. Now, I think we've probably done enough slides here. So let's actually jump in and start looking at some real world demo and some real world stuff. So this is the tool Test Modeler. Okay, it's a web-based platform. We have a cloud environment. You could sign up for a free trial if you like. For some of our larger customers, they obviously take this on premise, where security is a big issue. But basically, what you can do is you can come into the tool, you can sign in, as a user, and then based off of that user, you can come in and you can start to create a workspace and collaborating together on building out models to test your application. Now, what we have done here is we have set up a new project for Cypress, specifically for the webinar we're giving today. And we have set this up so that it's using a Cypress framework, which is living inside, a Git source control repository. Okay. Now, just before we get started, and I'll share the link for this at the end, if you want to get going on this by yourself and have a little play along, even now while we're giving the webinar, you can. If you go to testmodeler.io, you can sign up, but also what you'll find on there is everything I'm showing in this webinar is going to follow this Cypress tutorial we have. Okay, demo video at the top, but the real interesting stuff is each of the steps that we're going to go through now. We're going to scan an existing web application, we're going to build a model, we're going to generate some Cypress scripts, and then at the end, we're going to execute some test cases. Okay, so you can follow along with this in your own time afterwards if you like, and that's absolutely not a problem. Now, what we are going to do here is we are going to focus on a little sign-up page that we have in an e-commerce system. And this sign-up page, it's pretty classic. There's a first name, there's a last name, there's an email, a password, a confirm password, and you can click the create an account button. Pretty standard. What we are going to use is a little accelerator we have here. And what this allows us to do is to come in and start to scan the web application. So we'll come in and we're literally just going to select the components that we want to automate in our app. Okay, so here we're just going to select these inputs and buttons, and you'll see that we have 6 items that have been scanned. Now we can come in and we can upload these, and we'll see that we have a new page object that has been uploaded successfully. Fantastic. We come back to the first tab here, do a refresh. what you are going to see is that we have two objects that have been created. The first one is an object repository. So we have objects that have been scanned, and within here, what we have are the different identifiers for pulling these out. So for the first name element, we've got all sorts of different XPaths and identifiers for extracting that component. We've got things like the last name, we've got a password, we've got a confirm password, and clicking the create an account button. So we've gone through and we've pulled out all of these different identifiers for all of these different elements that we scanned. Okay. Now, the crucial piece here is what we've also done is we've built out a little implementation layer in Cypress. Okay. Now, what you will see in here is we have functions and we have actions. So we have taken what we have scanned here, we've basically assembled it into different actions we can perform, like enter a first name, enter an email, enter confirm password, click create an account, go to the URL, etc. If we take a look behind here, so let's look at the enter email, what you will see is that we have a bit of Cypress code here. Now we have cheated a bit and we have used the XPath library. You could just use standard Cypress, that's absolutely fine. For this demo, we just chose to use the XPath library. But anyway, what you'll see here is we've basically got little code snippets. Here it's going to go away and enter an email into our email field. You know, if we take a look at another one, here we've got one for entering a password into our confirm password field. So we've built out, you know, essentially, you could think of this a bit like a page object. We've got our actions and we've got our underlying functions underneath to go and perform these actions. Now, if you think about more advanced automation, you are going to need to enter some custom code. There's no getting around that. We like to think of ourselves as an accelerator, but the simple stuff that we can scan and we can provide code for automatically, let us do it. If we cannot provide code for that, so you've got an advanced UI component like a carousel or a paginated table or something a little bit more intricate, you can come in here, you can say, I want to create a new function, I'm going to put some custom code in, and you can paste that in here. Okay. You could also import existing code. So, you know, if you've got any existing page objects in JavaScript or any existing code, you can come in, you can import that, and that will become available in exactly the same way. Okay. Now, obviously here we've got some objects which we can interact with our application with. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to enter the world of modeling. So I'm going to click here to create a new model. And what you'll see is we've basically got a model editor. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I said that this is basically no different to using Visio, BPMN-like tools, etc., etc. You can come in, you can start dragging blocks, and you can start connecting them together. It's pretty simple. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we have an existing application that we're starting from. So what that means is that we're a little bit more fortunate because we have some automation actions that we can leverage to build our model of our application very quickly. Now, we're literally just going to use these like building blocks, and we're just going to think about what actions do I want to perform and how is my system going to react. So the first thing I can do is go to the URL. I can then enter a first name, and I can then enter a last name. Now, what we find in the industry, you know, we go into companies, and the first time we go in, we almost do a little mini audit to understand, you know, what test cases do they have already? How are they testing? How well are they testing? How well do they understand their systems? What you will often find if you look at a lot of test cases out there, I would say this is more from inexperienced testers, that they're very happy path driven. They're mostly focusing on the happy scenarios. What happens when I enter positive data? When I enter, you know, a valid last name, a valid first name, etc. As we brought in these objects here, we have split it out into different equivalence classes. So we're not just thinking about the good data combinations, we're thinking about bad data combinations. What's an invalid last name? What's an empty last name? What's a valid last name? We've got different equivalence classes. Now, if we look underneath here, test data, what you'll see is here we've got some invalid data, an invalid last name and some bad characters. We've got an empty last name. Here we've got something a little bit more interesting, which is a valid last name. Now, this is where you start to enter the world of test data. You could start putting in synthetic data functions, go and generate me a random name, go and generate me a random company. You could go much deeper in here. You could start casting SQL. You could start doing RPA. You could log into green screen environments. Go and get me different customer accounts I need. Go and get me something physical from a real database that exists. Basically, all we're doing here is we're saying, conceptually, we've got a valid last name. What does that actually mean? How do we tie that to something that makes sense in our world? The next thing we'll do is we'll enter an email. We're then going to enter a password. And finally, I guess what we'll do here is we'll click the create an account button, which is this one here. Now, let's think about this a second. So if we just trace through one of the routes together, if I enter a valid name and then enter a valid last name, a valid email and a valid password, and I click create an account, so I've entered all of my valid data, that is where we should go off and we should have a new successful registration, my positive kind of journey. If I go through any of these other routes and I drop off with some bad data, that is where I may end up in some kind of error state. Now, we've been a little bit lazy here. We've not actually scanned any error messages, but I could come in and I could start asserting different errors are shown. If I'm doing API testing, I may go off and assert different response codes have come back, different messages are being triggered, etc., etc. But what you should end up with at the end is a model, okay, a visual image which represents how your process works. So here we have a model which represents our sign-up process. How do I end up successfully registered? When do I end up in an error state? Okay, and this is really crucial. This is what modeling is all about. So at the beginning I said modeling is all about visual images. Here is your visual image that represents that part of the system. Okay, now it's obviously quite a simple process. Towards the end we'll look at some more complex examples, but obviously it's better to start small, it's better to start simple, and it's actually better to split things down into very small components and start thinking about them. Now, once we've got a model, what we can actually do is we can use that to generate test cases. And this is classic model-based testing again. You pick up the model and you put it through some kind of function which is going to generate a test suite for you. So here we've basically got 7 parts that make up our test suite. And this test suite is the minimum number of tests to cover every single edge in our model. And you'll see here as I'm flicking through the different deviations we're covering here, my negative tests where I end up in an error, and our one happy path, our one positive test that we have. Now you could use these tests and you could say, let's go and push them into a test case management tool. So maybe we want to go off and push these into something like Jira. Okay, absolutely no problem. We could go off and we can do that. We might go off and we might push them to something like ALM or some other tool that we have available within our, within the way we're developing our software and the way we're tracking it. But what you'll see here, if I do a refresh, we've got a little link next to these. I can open this one up. You'll see it's now got a Jira associated with it. And we can open up that Jira, we can take a look, and what you'll see is in this case, the test that has been created, the ticket here, our test steps. Here we're also using X-ray. So it's going to have all of our test steps and test details filled out as well. Okay. Now, the more interesting piece is what we can do is we can actually now come in and we could start to create some automation. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say, go away, generate me some automation. And we'll also just add a little commit message. So what we're going to do is we're going to push this into Git. Okay. So first it's going to go off and, resolve any data dependencies we have. Okay. We may be looking up data from external data sources, which is absolutely fine. It's then going to go off and generate our Cypress code, okay, for us. And the third thing it's going to do here is it's going to push this and embed it inside our source control management system. So let me get GoToMeeting out of the way a little bit here. Let me go back into our GitHub project. If we come in and look at the commits here, what you'll see is that we've got a new commit that was just made 18 seconds ago. If we look at this commit, what you're going to see is that we have all of our Cypress code here that we've just assembled. Okay, so we're going through, we're assembling our scripts, and we've got our different scenarios here where we're going through and we're entering different types of data into different fields and our different scenarios. Okay, now what we can then do is we could come into our local repository. We could do a git pull and just pull that down. We could just trigger this as part of our CI/CD infrastructure. You know, our tests have been published now. What do we care? They've gone away, and let's just leave them to the next build cycle to get picked up. But what you'll see here is we've got those tests that have been produced and they've been embedded, and we can now come in and we could say, let's pick one of these up and let's go and use that to test our underlying registration process. So you'll see here, we've just gone in and we've just entered some first names, some emails, etc. Okay, and we could run any of these and we could go through and, you know, start messing around and running our automation. Now, this is obviously quite a simple example, okay, just to give you a taste of what modeling is about and how we can go away and create models and automation. Okay, so obviously we've just picked up this form, we've scanned it, we've built a model, and we've pushed out some Cypress code into our automation framework in our source control repository. Now, the reality of most testing is it's much more complex than this. Systems we face are much, much more complex. You could have several steps. Now, a really good example of this is actually something that we've just been working on for a low-code platform. Okay. Now, if you take a look here, this was actually for an onboarding, an employee onboarding process. And this has actually got about 11 different stages someone has to go through to onboard a new employee. Okay. Now, what we have here are the concept of sub-processes. We can open one of these up, and what you'll see inside here is we have all of the kind of model, all of the model logic which exists for that kind of phase of the application. Now, once you create a model, it becomes a reusable building block. Okay, so someone at some point came in and they built out a model for page 3. Now, this was actually auto-generated, but someone could have come in and manually created this. Once that has been embedded, all you need to do is come along, chain them together, and you can build out your much richer end-to-end scenarios. Okay, now again, this is a very powerful feature of modeling and model-based testing. It's very visual. You can see the full end-to-end chain. If I need to know something in more detail, I just come in and I just expand it, and then I can see what's happening in that particular process. Okay, and again, we're going to pick up this model. We're going to, you know, offlay the complexity of our system to the model-based testing tool, and we're going to say, generate me the perfect set of tests given a criteria I specify to test this particular process I have in my system. And here you'll see we've got 39 paths. In this case, we actually push the run results back up to test modeler. And what you'll see if we take a look in here, we've actually got some screenshots of our employee process as we went through running it. Okay, so you can add, you know, logging, you can capture screenshots, you can push them back up to test modeler, and they can appear overlaid on top of your model. Now, again, another benefit of model-based testing, once you've got the run results on top here, you can actually use that to start to understand what user journeys are affected, you know, from this failure, and you can trace through exactly what steps we've gone through. So it's very visual, and that is really just the main benefit of modeling. It's all about visualizing, understanding, but also overlaying a lot of structure here. Okay. Now, you can do a lot here. You could overlay test data, as we said, but hopefully, you know, this is giving you some insight into what modeling is all about and what it entails. Now, just to kind of summarize before we take a look at the questions and see what's kind of going on there, I think one of the other benefits of modeling here, if you look at the testing industry in general, everyone's kind of talking about AI and machine learning at the moment. The reality is, you know, the testing industry, as we see it today, is very, very unstructured. We don't really have resources of structured data. If you look at a classic test suite, you know, think about classic legacy ALM. If you went in there and looked at a test suite, it's very textual focused. You've got lists of test steps, okay? How are you going to apply AI and machine learning to something that is that natured? You just can't. You know, to apply machine learning and AI, you need to have very structured data, okay? And it needs to be widely available, it needs to be well-formed, and it just needs to be very good, okay? We do not have that in the testing domain. Modeling is overlaying structure because a model is just inherently structured by nature, okay? And really what that is going to allow us to do, and where we're spending a lot of you know, our R&D time at the moment, is taking all of this structured data and starting to look at it and understand how we can apply AI, how we can apply machine learning into the testing domain, now that we've got kind of structured data available, we know the traceability, where we push test cases to, where we pushed automation to, where a requirement has come from, etc., etc. So hopefully that's giving you a bit of taste of modeling, the future direction, what it's all about. I'll just finish up with this slide, which is, covering more of kind of the foundational elements and the foundational benefits. Modeling allows you to design systems. It's very easy. Anyone can create flowcharts. We've worked with a lot of companies where we're literally taking people from no automation background and we are helping them to create automation using modeling. Every modeling tool out there will allow you to auto-generate test cases, dependent on some kind of criteria that you give. You could also use models to generate data and virtual services. You can execute tests from the models. You've got great reporting, great feedback, which is absolutely crucial. But also, as the system changes, all you're doing is just coming through and updating your models. And then as a result of that, you will just go away, perform a regenerate, and regenerate all of your automation from it. Okay, so I'm just going to go on this slide just for 1 second, and then we'll loop back and have a look at the questions. So if anyone's interested in any further information, you can sign up, to Test Modeler. You can follow any of the tutorials we have, which I showed at the beginning, which will walk you through step by step how to do exactly what we've done in this webinar. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or just join our, LinkedIn or Twitter pages, or just drop me an email if you'd like to chat about this more. Now, let's jump over and let's go to some questions and let's see what's going on. Okay, so we have quite a few questions here. So I think what we'll do is we'll start from the top, okay, and then what we will do is we'll just work our way down answering these one by one. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'm hoping we should be able to get through quite a few of these. So the first one here, how does the scanner choose which selectors to use, especially if the elements have random IDs, classes that can't be used, will it avoid them? Okay, this is a great question. So if we look at the scanner, what you'll see is there's a review process in here. You can come in and you can view what has been scanned. You'll see some of these have got, warning labels next to them. If we see something that does not look good, we will automatically flag this. Basically, for us, a not very good identifier is something which is quite long, or it looks like it contains random text inside, okay? Or it has something which matches with, more than one element. Okay, so you can manually override this and you can, go to your heart's content editing these, which is absolutely fine. I would say that, applications which have, inherently bad identifiers are usually very hard to automate anyway. And typically in that case, you would be better off writing custom code to try and avoid that problem. Okay, so, that is why we have built a lot of extensibility into the tool to get around that. If you need to write custom code, you absolutely can. And, we would actually recommend that in that condition, along with, more advanced UI types like paginated tables, carousels, which we mentioned as well. Okay, so how clean is the output Cypress code? Often auto-generated code is far more complicated than it needs to be. Okay, again, this is a good question. So how clean is it? Well, basically, you can edit how you want the code to be generated. So everything behind Test Modeler is based off of code templates. So if you have a particular way that you want your code to be architectured or want it to be generated, you could come in and you could edit our code templates and you can go and manipulate them to generate the code that you wanted to generate. Okay. You could also split the code up. So, for a lot of frameworks, we will generate page objects and we will push them out. So you can adhere to good architecture and good standards. What I would say is that we're trying to move people away from the underlying automation code, and we're trying to get them to manage the models themselves instead of managing these automation scripts. Okay, so from that level, you're not really involved in the actual automation scenarios anymore. You're involved with the models and the underlying automation code to automate those elements and those actions you want to be performed on the page. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Obviously auto-generated code may not be as good as something, a good automation engineer can write. But certainly we've had a lot of success with this approach with companies where they've got a mixture of, I hate the word resources, but resources available, to perform automation for them. Okay. Does it also scan custom data attributes? For example, if you have data test ID or data CY attribute? Yeah, absolutely. So you can configure the scanner to scan any kind of attribute that you want to. You know, we're doing a lot of work with Dynamics 365 testing at the moment. And if you look at that, there's actually only two really good identifiers to use. They are the data ID and the ARIA label. If you use anything else, it likely changes every time you run your automation and open a page in Dynamics 365. So I would say that this is absolutely vital. You need to be able to go in and you need to be able to override these attributes and bring them in. Okay, and that's entirely possible. Okay, so the next one here, can we use this with visual testing like Applitools, Percy, etc.? Yeah, absolutely. So what we are doing here, and what you'll find with most model-based testing tools, is they are just auto-generating code for you into your existing automation framework. Now, what we've done here is we've focused very heavily on Cypress, obviously, because we're all in the Cypress Meetup group. But this could be other languages as well, okay? But all you're doing is you're just generating that code automatically and pushing it into some kind of framework you have control over. So if you want to run those scripts in some kind of cloud environment, like Source Labs, Perfecto, AWS, etc., that's absolutely great. You can do that. And we've got very good partnership with Perfecto in particular for doing that. We've also got partnership with companies like Applitools, where you could go off and you could perform your visual testing, but that is up to you to configure that inside your framework and have it there attached to it. We're just generating the code, pushing it into your framework. It's up to you how you add additional plugins, how you execute those tests, etc., etc. Okay, won't this introduce a lot of end-to-end UI tests? Some of the test cases can be moved to unit level so it can be executed faster. Yeah, absolutely. This is very much revolving around what your underlying testing strategy is. I think if you look at a lot of talks out there, people will talk about testing pyramids. You should focus most of your tests at the unit level, and you may have not so many the UI level, etc., etc. Okay, so it's kind of up to you with your testing strategy where you're going to focus your testing efforts. It is worthwhile saying that even though in this presentation we have gone through and we focus extensively on UI testing, the same concepts apply to API testing. They could also apply to data testing if you're thinking about ETL processes or business intelligence dashboards, etc. They're just different types of models. You're modeling different messages we're going to send to an API and different responses that could come back. Okay, everything we test and the way we test can actually be resolved back to a model. There's fantastic tools out there by people like Paul Gerard, and they will say that every type of testing is actually model-based testing. Here we're doing explicit model-based testing. We're explicitly drawing diagrams which represent a system we're testing. But a lot of the time when you're testing, you're actually going through and you're doing implicit modeling. In your head, you're building a model of how this system works. And then inside your head, you are coming out and you're saying, I think this will be a good test scenario for me to test. Okay. So, I would say all types of testing revolve to modeling in some way. And certainly you can use our tool for different types of testing as well in that space. Okay, how does the scanner handle complex pages that have a lot of React or JavaScript, for example? Okay, so typically what you will do is you will build this out in your framework. So you may have functions like get web element, which will check that web element is available on the page. It may asynchronously wait for it to become available, and then it will perform actions on it. A good example of complex elements, a lot of you may be familiar with something called Shadow DOM, and that's extremely hard. We're working with a financial company at the moment, and if you want to test a Shadow DOM application, you have to go in, you have to pick the element I want to interact with, and you have to trace up the whole DOM hierarchy and pick out the different identifiers all the way up that DOM. Classically, you could end up with 7 or 8 different identifiers. You have to go through and expand just to get to the one element you want to interact with, which is very, very complex. So, we work with real world enterprise applications where, there's all sorts of different nasties, React, JavaScript, Angular, Shadow DOM, etc., iframes. We've come across most of them. We've managed to successfully handle them. Every so often something does come up that we're not aware of, but usually we're pretty quick to react and handle those kinds of problems. Okay. How would one use model-based testing to test legacy software such as PeopleSoft? Okay, a lot of this would come down to, you know, the automation framework that I'm going to use to automate my type of application. So, you know, if we're testing something like SAP, you know, there's actually not that many good automation technology out there for testing that type of application. So, you know, a company may use a vendor-based tool like UFT, or something like, you know, Ranorax to actually automate that type of application, which is absolutely fine. So, you know, a lot of it is taking a look at the app that I'm testing and figuring out, you know, what the best way is for me to test that application and plug that automation into Test Modeler and use that to generate the automation for you. Okay, so we're just going to do 2 more questions, I think. You know, we're coming up to the hour. So what is the term shift left? Okay, so shift left is all about moving, you know, testing basically to much earlier in the software development lifecycle. So classically, testing is left until the very end of, you know, the way we develop software, and it's very, very late. You know, in some companies, we really don't see testing happen until something reaches production. So shifting left is trying to do much more earlier when we develop our software. If you think about modeling, you could start defining a model as soon as you start building out your requirement. You could have your manual test cases available. Obviously, you can't have your automation ready until the application exists, but you could do a lot more of that work upfront inside my software delivery lifecycle. So that's basically what shift left is. Okay, the final question here, if you scan 2 pages and there are similar things done on both, will the tool duplicate or turn it into a Cypress custom command so it only exists once? Okay, again, this is going to come down to, you know, you kind of applying some of your domain knowledge here. Okay, I think a good example of this would be an e-commerce system. If you think about a product page, that's quite generic. Okay, so ideally what you should do is you should create a generic page object that will interact with any product page that I have in my shopping, you know, e-commerce system. It would be kind of silly of me to click on every single product I have and go through and scan, you know, basically the same elements for every single one. Okay, so it's kind of up to you to decide how you're going to organize this sensibly. Obviously, you could go through and do this every time uniquely, and that will work. It's not going to serve you very well in the long run. So you do have to apply some, you know, knowledge and some experience over this to create good, good architectured automation. Now we're just coming up and we're just finishing. So I'm aware I'm running over time. So Mary, I'm going to hand back to you if that's okay. If you're still around.
Oh, hello. Yeah, sorry. I was unable to unmute. Yeah, thank you so much, James. I was wondering because there's still a lot of questions that are left unanswered. Will you be able to maybe just add the answers in our meetup group so at least the attendees can just refer like to the comments like much later on? Hello. Oh. Great. Okay. Yep. I think Gary, if you could unmute James
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm unmuted.
Thanks.
Yes, we will share them. Absolutely, that's not a problem.
All right. Yep, that would be good. Yeah. Cool. And Gary, I can hand over to you now because I think you have some other stuff that you want to share as well.
Yes, Mary. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, James, for taking us through MBT solution for Cypress. At least this is the first time I'm just hearing about MBT with Cypress. And it was indeed very useful to many of us as well. So thank you so much once again. Before we conclude today's event, we would like to do a quick announcement. Many of you asked for a Cypress Slack channel to shoot your queries. So in case if you want to join the channel, so it's called as Cypress ioukcommunity.slack.com, and it is already available in our Meetup group. Just in case if you would like to join, please do let us know. Just email us your email ID so that, just send us your email ID so that we will be able to add you over there. Also, in case if anyone is having an interesting solution, I mean the Cypress solution, and would like to share it in this particular meetup, we always welcome you. In case if you wish, please don't hesitate to contact me or Mary about your interest. This group is completely for you guys and we wish to continue have your contributions as well to make this forum a big success. And it has been a very success, and we have reached almost 400 members in this particular meetup group within 2 months of time. And we really wanted to thank you guys for all your support that you're doing. And thank you very much. So with that said, Mary, do you have anything from your side? Cool. All right. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy your rest of your evening. I'll meet you next month's Cypress IO UK Communities Meetup. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.